Ben Jealous is with us in Washington, D.C. He is the former NAACP president, the youngest elected to be president of the NAACP, now a partner at Kapoor Capital and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Ben, as Eleanor Holmes Norton talks about the trajectory of Julian Bond's life, you were with him in those later years as he was branching out from civil rights, but never really that far human rights, considering you were so active together on the issue of police brutality and the killing of young black men and women. Talk about what Julian and you did together.
You know, look, he was somebody who was just very clear that we had to do what was right, and we had to do it now. And so, you know, we would get together, and the conversations would be very short. It would really come down to, so, Ben, what do we need to do? You know, we went back to Georgia together to take on the state when they seemed so intent on killing Troy Davis, and made sure that the world knew his name, but then followed through to make sure that states whose folks had become outraged that this was still possible would go forward to abolish the death penalty in their state. He also, you know, was someone, quite frankly, who could see around corners, who knew where the movement had to head next. He made sure that the CEO of the NAACP that he chose would be somebody who supported marriage equality, because he understood that was a place that we had to go next. And so as I sat next to the finalists when I was being chosen, and there were three of us, you know, one of us was a pastor from Dallas, Texas. One of us was a politician from Florida. They're both great men. We started talking about kind of what we believed in. It became clear that all three of us were folks who knew that marriage equality was an issue that we would all have to stand up for as a movement. And yet the NAACP had no policy on that at the time. That was Bond saying, look, this is where we have to go. If we're going to pick somebody to be our CEO, they have to be prepared to go there with me.
And I want to turn to Julian Bond speaking in 2009, a very brief comment, the clip we chose, when he spoke at a human rights campaign dinner in Los Angeles.
Black people, of all people, should not oppose equality, and that is what gay marriage is. So
that was Julian Bond in 2009. This is when President Obama, right around the time he was first taking office, Ben Jealous.
Yeah, you know, he was so smooth about it. I mean, that was the part that was so kind of seductive about Julian, I think, even for those who wanted to oppose him, is that his logic was succinct, it made sense, and he presented it in a way that you wanted to say, me too. And in the end, you know, there were only two people on the 64-member board who voted against us. And that was absolutely because he took the time to win folks over, and when he made his case, it was very hard to say no.
Environmental activism, Ben Jealous.
You know, there was a time when I was CEO, and I was called by Mike Brune, who was the CEO of the Sierra Club, and asked if I would lock myself to the White House gate with him to protest the Keystone Pipeline. And I wanted to do it, but I knew that it would be controversial for me to do it because we didn't have policy, and we had other issues I was expected to lead on at the moment. And so I called Julian, and Julian said, I'll go. And that was what was so, you know, wonderful about him, is that he was always courageous, always willing to be on the cutting edge, and always willing to help lead, and willing to be part of a leadership team, and so humble while being so powerful. You know, I said to him once, I said, yeah, tell me about the March on Washington. And he was somebody who didn't want to talk about the past much, but he indulged me. He said, well, Ben, you know, you have to understand what my role was. And I said, well, what was your role? He said, well, my role at the March on Washington was passing out Cokes to the people who were really famous. And I said, so what was the high point for you? And he said, it was when Sammy Davis Jr. looked at me, winked, and snapped his finger and pointed at me and said, you know, kid, you're cool.
I want to go to 2013, Julian Bond speaking at the 50th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington.
I'm delighted to be here just as I was delighted to be here 50 years ago. Then we could not have imagined we'd be here 50 years later with a black president and a black attorney general. But that's a measure of how far we have come. But still we march. We march because Trayvon Martin has joined Emmett Till in the pantheon of young black martyrs. We march because the United States Supreme Court has eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, for which we fought and died. We march because every economic indicator shows gaping white-black disparities. We march for freedom from white supremacy. But still we have work to do. None of it is easy, but we have never wished our way to freedom. Instead, we've always worked our way. Today we have much more to work with, and we take heart that so much has changed. The changes that have come have everything to do with the work of the modern movement for civil rights. We must not forget that Dr. King stood before and with thousands, the people who made the mighty movement what it was. From Jamestown slave pens to Montgomery's boycotted buses, these ordinary men and women labored in obscurity. And from Montgomery forward, they provided the foot soldiers of the Freedom Army. They shared with King an abiding faith in America. They walked in dignity rather than ride in shame. They faced bombs in Birmingham and mobs in Mississippi. They sat down at lunch counters so others could stand up. They marched and they organized. Remember, Dr. King didn't march from Selma to Montgomery by himself. He didn't speak to an empty field at the March on Washington. There were thousands marching with him and before him, and thousands more who did the dirty work that preceded the triumphal march. The successful strategies of the modern movement were litigation, organization, mobilization, and coalition, all aimed at creating a national constituency for civil rights.
Julian Bond speaking in 2013 at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The War and Peace Report will continue remembering the life and legacy of Julian Bond after this minute.